concrete and finite.
Well, it is startling. It was certainly there was certainly some risk involved in the decision to use it as a book title, because it's not commercially wise to choose a book title that has people running in terror away from the bookstore, want nothing more to do with this concept. But I think that it is only sort of temporarily terrifying. It doesn't need to be a cause for despair. It also doesn't need to be a cause for that kind of really strenuous carpe diem, I'm going to do something totally amazing with every day and go, kite surfing at the weekend, because if you don't do that and go ice climbing and base jumping, then you're not really living. It's not that either. It's just this kind of down-to-earth recognition that, like, oh, yeah, this is true. I knew this on some level, and there's nothing to be done about it. If I can let go of the desire to kind of transcend this situation, to sort of find an escape clause in the contract of the human condition, it's great, because then with a far more relaxed sort of bearing, I can just make sure that I spend today on some things that I really care about, and I can let go of this idea that every single thing that I on some level ought to do is going to get done. Most of them aren't. You come down to earth, but that's good. Down to earth is a good place to be. I think it's only sort of temporarily completely horrifying.
Well, there's an endorsement. How about we put that on the back of your book? Only temporarily completely horrifying.
I kind of love that. I would buy that book, but I might be odd.
I think I might buy that too. But so then, like, just as we wrap up here, it is that very finite span a gift in some sense? Does it give us something that immortality would not?
Yes, absolutely. Several different philosophers at different points, including the contemporary philosopher Martin Hugland, whose book I quote, his book This Life, have pointed out that eternal life, if we had it, and if what was meant by that was just the endless continuation of our life on Earth, that's not what religious people tend to mean by the phrase, but if that's what we had, it would be terrible in many ways, because nothing would ever be at stake about how we used any moment. And the answer to the question, should I do X or Y with my day-to-day, would always be, who cares? And it has a way of draining the value from life. Hagland and others make the case that finitude is actually the precondition for our lives being meaningful, that if you had enough lifetime to try every career under the sun, then there would be no particular value in the choice you made when you chose to do one of them for 100 years before moving on to the next one. The fact that we make our choices in a condition of being finite is what imbues those choices with value and meaning, because it's an affirmation. We're saying, look, I can't do everything, and yet I choose to do this. So in the end, I think it's where meaning comes from, and that immortality would be terrible.
Oliver Burkeman, it's so good to talk to you. Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Oliver Burkeman is a writer for The Guardian newspaper. He is the author of The Antidote, Happiness for People Who Can't Stand Positive Thinking. And more recently, 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals. Oliver spoke to you from Yorkshire. You are listening to Tapestry on CBC Radio One, on Sirius XM satellite radio, on podcast, on CBC Listen, and online at cbc.ca. I'm Mary Hines. Depending on where you are in this big country, you might be seeing the first tentative signs of spring, or you could be thigh-deep in snow. Either way, New Year's is now a distant memory, and for many of us, the resolutions that might have gone along with it have long been buried in that snow. Even if you did manage to knock a couple of goals off your list, what happens next? Does your to-do list ever really get any more manageable? What if 2 full years into the pandemic, it might just be time to quit the whole self-improvement thing? Faith Hill is an associate editor at The Atlantic. She wrote a piece called Resolutions Are Not the Vibe for 2022. Hello, Faith Hill.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here. I know you were thinking about New Year's resolutions when you wrote your piece, but there's something about the drive to be better that it hangs around, right? Long after January. And I know you're not a big fan. What do you find perturbing about this frantic self-improvement drive?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think, even before the pandemic started and not just on New Year's, I have had a complicated relationship with resolutions. I think I'm someone who feels really stressed out all the time about self-improvement, kind of all year round. And then when New Year's comes, it's like I don't need a day or a month to set aside, to think about goals and accomplishments or lack thereof. So I'm, thinking about that already. And I can't say how many other people feel the same, but anecdotally, I think a lot of people I've talked to have felt the same kind of constant pressure. It's like, being on a hamster wheel where you keep trying, but you never quite feel good enough. And I think to some degree it's culturally mediated. We're sort of in a cultural moment in the US, at least, where there's a lot of focus on self-improvement in different forms. There's all these self-help books and lifestyle coaches and gurus and products being marketed to people who want to look and perform and live better in all these various ways.
Oh, we're right there beside you in Canada. We are right there beside you.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
It's not purely an American phenomenon. Well, a question you've asked is, if we can't let go of frantic self-improvement nearly 2 years into a pandemic, when can we? And I'm really interested in the timing of this. Do you find there's something really harsh about the timing of all this? Because we are in kind of desperate times, and we have been for a couple of years now. Why the urge to put extra pressure on in the midst of a time that's really trying all by itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's interesting. It's, I think, partly time bound, but I think it's kind of getting at something that's really innately human, that's not just the time or the culture that we're in, but I think to some degree the fear of not accomplishing enough is very existential and kind of something we always feel. But especially right now, I think, in the pandemic, on the one hand, resolutions can seem especially appealing because we've lost control over so much, and it can be comforting to feel like we can have some control back and shape some outcomes, even if they're small ones and just in our own life. But at the same time, I think the pandemic's been a lesson in how little we actually can influence the course of our lives. There are just some outcomes we can't change, and that's become very clear. And I think a lot of people also just feel exhausted, just by living through the pandemic. They haven't done all the things they wanted to do. And I think this is a good time for people to sort of accept that, that's okay. We won't always have control, and, we're not robots made to check things off a list, that it's actually kind of beautifully human to look up from this pandemic and find that our lives still have meaning, even if we haven't done all the things we want to do.
So the life that has meaning doesn't have to be tethered to a to-do list that has every single thing crossed off it.
Exactly, yeah. And I think we can still be reflective without thinking of things in terms of outcomes. I think part of the challenge is sort of being reflective in a more holistic way, where we're thinking about what we value and care about in life without feeling like those things have to be easily measurable, because sometimes the most important things are not quantifiable, and they're not things that you can accomplish or start and finish.
Do you find you're cutting yourself a little bit of slack because of the times we're in? Have you consciously tried to be a little more gentle with yourself, given that you're a person who does tend to do the self-improvement thing well beyond the New Year's resolution?
Yeah, I'm really trying to do that. I think, in some ways the pandemic was kind of a lesson for me in how you can get some accomplishments done and still not feel like it's totally satisfying. Like, I think I really threw myself into work in the beginning of the pandemic, like a lot of people did, and did accomplish some goals. But even when we do that, it doesn't take us off that hamster wheel. We're still finding ourselves running on it. And sort of looking back at, my experience thus far and the year that did end, I think I have realized that some of my, relationships and these sort of larger, fuzzier things in my life are the ones that really have gotten me through it and that I want to focus on going forward.